The Civic Culture, Political Attitudes and Democracy in Five Nations, 1963, by Gabriel Almond and Sidney Verba, is a foundational study in comparative political science and political sociology. It investigates the cultural foundations that support democratic stability and development. Through detailed surveys conducted in the United States, United Kingdom, Germany, Italy, and Mexico, Almond and Verba introduced a new way to understand the interaction between citizens and political systems. The work was groundbreaking in emphasizing that democracy cannot be explained by institutions alone, but must consider the cultural orientations and attitudes of the people. The concept of political culture. Almond and Verba define political culture as the pattern of individual attitudes and orientations toward politics and the political system. It includes knowledge of and interest in politics, feelings of efficacy, trust in institutions, and the sense of civic duty. They argue that political culture is an essential component of a stable democracy because it shapes how citizens interact with the political process, how much they participate, and how they perceive authority and institutions. Political culture is not uniform. It comprises various elements inherited from history, social structures, and collective experiences. These differences explain why democratic institutions function differently across societies, even when the formal structures are similar. 3 types of political culture. Almond and Verba identify 3 ideal types of political culture. 1. Parochial culture. In parochial political cultures, citizens are only vaguely aware of the existence of a political system. Their orientation is toward local or traditional authority, and they show little interest or knowledge of national politics. Such cultures are found in tribal or traditional societies where government is seen as distant or irrelevant to daily life. 2. Subject culture. In a subject political culture, citizens are aware of the central government and its decisions, but they are largely passive. They feel that they have little influence and do not actively participate. They obey authority but do not feel empowered to challenge or shape it. Almond and Verba found subject cultures in more authoritarian or bureaucratically centralized states. 3. Participant culture. This type of culture is characterized by an informed and active citizenry that engages in politics and believes it can influence government. Citizens have a strong sense of civic duty and trust in democratic processes. Participation can take many forms, from voting and petitioning to joining civic associations. This culture is typical of well-functioning democracies. Each of these types has different implications for the health of democracy. A purely parochial or subject culture lacks the active engagement needed for democratic governance. A purely participant culture, however, may lead to instability if all groups expect constant influence. Therefore, Almond and Verba advocate for a civic culture, a balanced mix of the 3. The civic culture, a balanced ideal. The civic culture is Almond and Verba's ideal type for democratic stability. It is not dominated by activism or political detachment, but combines elements of parochialism, subjectness, and participation. In such a culture, citizens feel involved but not overwhelmed by politics. They trust institutions yet retain the right to criticize them. They accept diversity of opinion. They have a sense of efficacy but not unrealistic expectations. This mix provides flexibility and moderation, allowing democratic systems to adapt to change without breaking down. The civic culture encourages cooperation, tolerance, and negotiation, qualities necessary for democratic consolidation. Comparative study, the 5 nations. Almond and Verba conducted surveys in 5 countries to assess their political cultures. They used interviews, questionnaires, and statistical analysis to explore attitudes toward political authority, participation, and civic responsibility. Answer 1. United States. The U.S. emerged as the strongest example of the civic culture. Citizens displayed high levels of political interest, efficacy, and trust. Participation was common, and many were involved in local governance, parties, or civic associations. The American political system fostered a sense of individual responsibility and optimism about change through democratic means. 2. United Kingdom. Britain showed similar strengths, but with a more deferential style. Citizens trusted institutions and accepted authority with less individual activism. The British culture emphasized stability, tradition, and gradual reform, While less participatory than the US, it still displayed a robust civic orientation. 3. Germany, West. West Germany in the early 1960s was still recovering from World War II and Nazism. The political culture leaned toward subject orientation. Citizens were aware of and loyal to democratic institutions, but hesitant to engage fully. There was a sense of political reticence, reflecting the recent trauma and institutional rebuilding. Italy presented a fragmented picture. Many Italians felt alienated from national politics and lacked trust in political institutions. Participation was often limited or motivated by clientelism rather than civic duty. The culture displayed weak integration between citizens and the political system, which the authors considered a risk for democratic stability. 5. Mexico. Mexico, at the time a one-party dominant system, displayed characteristics of a parochial subject culture. Many citizens were aware of authority, but passive in response. Participation was minimal, and institutions were perceived as distant or unresponsive. Democratic attitudes were limited by authoritarian legacies and economic inequalities. These findings led Almond and Verba to conclude that political culture varies significantly even among societies with similar formal institutions. The presence or absence of a civic culture has a major impact on the functioning and endurance of democratic systems. Political socialization. A critical component of Almond and Verba's theory is political socialization, the process by which individuals acquire political values and beliefs. This occurs through family, education, media, religion, and peer groups. Civic culture is not static, but evolves through generational changes in socialization. The authors argue that democratic institutions can foster civic attitudes over time, but initial socialization is crucial. If citizens are taught to distrust or ignore political systems, building democratic habits becomes difficult. Therefore, civic education and public discourse are essential for maintaining democratic culture. Legacy and criticism. The civic culture had a profound influence on the field of political science. It shifted attention from formal institutions to behavioral and cultural factors in democracy. It helped establish political culture as a key concept in comparative politics and inspired further research into democratization and civic engagement. However, the book also faced criticism. Methodological issues. Some scholars question the validity of survey methods across different cultures and languages, arguing that attitudes may not translate well or be comparable. Static view of culture. Critics argued that Almond and Verba treated culture as overly stable and deterministic, underestimating the potential for change through political struggle or institutional reform. Western bias. The civic culture model was seen by some as implicitly favoring Anglo-American norms of democracy, overlooking alternative forms of civic engagement and collective political identities in other contexts. Despite these critiques, the work remains foundational. Its core insight, that democracy depends on cultural foundations as well as institutional design, continues to shape debates about democratic development, civic education, and political engagement today. Conclusion. Almond and Verba's The Civic Culture provides a deep understanding of how citizens relate to democratic institutions and the essential attitudes that sustain democratic life. The balance between participation and deference, trust and skepticism, tradition and change is crucial. A healthy democracy, they argue, is not just a matter of laws or constitutions, but also of shared values, civic norms, and collective habits of political engagement. This enduring insight makes the civic culture a seminal contribution to political thought and democratic theory.